Good evening and welcome to episode 91 of the Political Mike podcast. The vote for Speaker in 1855 was the longest in American history, taking 2 months. Initially, 21 candidates were vying for the role, with Congress deeply divided over the issue of slavery. Democrat William Richardson of Illinois, who supported slavery in future states, was an early frontrunner, but fell short far of the 113 votes needed. Anti-slavery congressman then decided to back Nathaniel Banks of Massachusetts, a member of the American Party, also known as the Know Nothing Party. On the 33rd ballot, Banks managed to win 100 votes, topping Richardson, but still falling short of the majority. As the debate over who would be the next speaker extended into January, Democratic Representative Albert Rust of Arkansas, who opposed Banks' candidacy, physically assaulted Greeley, who supported Banks. Rust struck a stunning blow on the right side of my head and followed it by 2 or 3 more as rapidly as possible, Greeley wrote, according to the Washington Post. On February 1st, 1856, Democrats decided to back pro-slavery Representative William Aiken Jr. of South Carolina. Democratic leaders also said they would support a proposal to elect a speaker via plurality if nobody could win a majority in the next 3 ballots. On February the 2nd, the plurality resolution passed. Banks received the majority of votes in each of the first 3 ballots, but he fell short of a majority each time. Aiken then seemed poised to pick up the plurality on the 4th vote, but it was Banks who managed to secure 103 votes to Aiken's 100 because some of Aiken's expected votes fell through. Banks had won the speakership on the 133rd ballot nearly 2 months after the first ballot had been cast. Fast forward to 1923, Massachusetts Republican Frederick Gillette, first elected speaker in 1919, now faced a rebellion in 1923 from the progressive wing of the Republican Party in a closely divided House. After 3 days of voting, Gillette was able to secure enough Republican support on the 9th ballot. He received 215 votes, which was less than a majority of the full House, but a majority of the votes that had been cast on that ballot, giving him another term as speaker. Many today are worried that we are headed for another long saga over who will be the next speaker, as we're now entering an 11th vote in the House of Representatives. On Tuesday, workers on Capitol Hill were seen moving diligently, transporting desks and furniture that belonged to Representative Kevin McCarthy into the Speaker's office, the only office located inside the Capitol Dome building itself. Later, of course, the House voted for Speaker, and McCarthy lost 3 times. McCarthy has so far failed miserably on 10 ballots. The House Minority Leader can only afford to lose 4 Republican votes, assuming no Democrats also vote for him and they do not vote present, which would lower the threshold of votes constituting a majority. McCarthy said, "This isn't about me. This is about the conference now because the members who are holding out, they want something for their personal selves." Now, it goes without saying that McCarthy has made concession after concession and has got very little for it. Here to help me make sense of all of this are a very dynamic group of political minds, and I'm so glad to have them on tonight. We have Mr. Josh Lewis, who's the host of the Saving Elephants podcast. He is a CPA who lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and works for the Oklahoma State Auditor's Office. He graduated from the College of the Ozarks Hard Work U, majoring in accounting with a minor in speech communications. As a diligent student of the conservative movement championed by Edmund Burke, Russell Kirk, and William F. Buckley, Thomas Sowell, and many others, Josh is passionate about conservatism, surviving, and thriving in the 21st century. Josh, thanks for being on tonight. We also have Samantha Cantor, who is a co-host of the Girl and the Gov podcast. She founded the Girl and the Gov to reimagine how the political space approaches and attracts the millennial and Gen Z voting bloc, putting civic education at the forefront of the mission and encapsulating it into digestible formats. She has created a concept that is not only effective, but also sustainable in nature. So, Sammy, thanks for being on. And of course, her co-host on the Girl and the Gov, the podcast, is Maddie Medvid, who joined the podcast in the summer of 2020, bringing fresh eyes and an innovative method for growth. Immediately, she wrapped into operations across the board. She values ideas and concepts, and she became immersed into the expanding ground covered by Girl and the Gov. And currently, her role encompasses operations, inclusive but not limited to management of the podcast and video creations. So, Maddie, thanks for being on. Nate Honore, a friend of mine from Quinnipiac University School of Law, who's currently working in a law firm in Connecticut. Ethan Zebediah, who I will add, he just recently got married this past New Year's Eve. Congratulations to you, Ethan. And he's also a huge supporter and friend of this podcast, The Political Mike. Great to have him on. And finally, Jerry Ford Jr., who is a private equity and M&A associate at Sidley Austin LLP, and also a graduate of Howard University School of Law. Before attending law school, he hosted a daily radio show on KJOZ 8808 AM in Texas, and he has made numerous television appearances on Fox 26 News and KHOU as a political commentator. So, ladies and gentlemen, so grateful to have each of you on tonight. I want to start off the conversation by asking you your thoughts about this whole debacle over who's going to be the next speaker. I think we're moving on to an 11th vote now. And so far, it doesn't look good for Kevin McCarthy, but there's also uncertainty because there is no other viable choice on the Republican side. There's no one else who can get even remotely close to 218, or even if one person voted president like they did yesterday, 217. What are your thoughts about what's going on? Why do you think that this fringe part of the Republican Party is really taking it to Kevin McCarthy? Is it only about optics, or is there something more to this story that we're not really paying attention to? Anyone can jump in.
Well, Mike, I guess I can begin. So I think that this is the, actualization of all of the hesitation that many American voters and, folks who pay attention to politics have had for at least the better part of the last decade when it comes to the Republican Party gaining power in Congress. We, and myself included, I guess, the public at large, though, have been hesitant to give the Republican Party this type of power because we were worried that they would not take it seriously. They wouldn't govern as a serious body. They wouldn't, take the duties of their office seriously. And I think that's why the Republican wave or the red wave rather, that we all expected last November turned out to be, a little more than a red trickle. And I think this is exactly why. It's because folks were incredibly hesitant and incredibly mistrusting, I guess, of what Republicans would do with power. And they had every reason to be. And it's clear this past week that this is why folks did not believe that the Republicans were ready to control the government. They have not shown, any sort of, and I guess it's ironic that you point out one of the most divided times in our nation's history. The Civil War was one of the last times that it was incredibly hard for Congress to name a Speaker of the House, because this being, one of the most incredibly divisive times in our current political landscape. So of course, we're an incredibly divided country. We're looking for a way forward. We have two very, polarizing views of how to move this country forward, whether that's, with the Republican Party, with the Democratic Party. But we're not seeing that alternative from the Republican Party. If you look, in the last, couple of years, the Republican Party doesn't even have a policy platform and hasn't had one since at least 2018. I would venture to say even earlier than that, 2017, following the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Republican Party hasn't had a policy platform. And the American people aren't sure how the Republican Party intends to direct this country beyond, some of the more, dare I say, asinine conspiracy theories that some of the members of this obstructionist faction of the Republican Party continue to put forward. I'll at risk of filibustering, I'll end my comments there. But needless to say, I think that this is just, this is exactly what we expected when we voted last November, and this is what we're getting.
Yeah, Mike. I agree with a lot of what Ethan just said. It is really hard to really wrap your mind around like what is happening here. You think about just going into 2022, the Republican Party had all the momentum behind them, right? Historically, they were in a very strong position. And you look at the first midterm of a election when there's a party in power. Who has the House and has the White House. You looked at 1994 and 2000. The only outlier there was in 2004 with George W. Bush. But usually when there's a party in power, that first midterm is usually a way for the party that's not in power. And then what we saw, this fall, that this red wave that should have happened did not happen. And now what is happening now, this new historical incident where McCarthy is having a hard time getting, the 218 or so votes that he would need to become speaker, is really somewhat embarrassing. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, you're Republican or Democrat, right now, it's not a good look for McCarthy. And the question becomes, as more and more ballots are filled out and he continues to lose these votes, even his supporters, people who, are voting for McCarthy, they will have to ask the question, is this the leader for the Republican Party here? Because, the only way it looks like that he will be able to become speaker is if he makes this speaker position like really weak. All these concessions that he is giving, up to, this wing of the party. I'm not even clear like of what they want. Right. I don't think anybody's clear of what they're actually asking for other than just to be anti-McCarthy. So it's something going to have to give soon, because right now the Congress is shut down. There's something that has to happen. Somebody has to budge. But it's not a good look for the Republican Party. It's not a good look for America. Right. Because our adversaries right now are probably looking at this, and you're seeing dysfunction, and you're seeing, our democracy in flux. And this doesn't create an image of stability across the world. So I think it's a problem, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the next few days.
Well, speaking as a Republican myself, I wished I could present to the panel the opposing view, but to be honest, I'm largely in agreement with you guys. Part of what Saving Elephants, of course, is all about is trying to call the Republican Party back to a saner time and, away from the conspiracy. And Ethan, as you correctly identified, the lack of a platform, and even to the degree they've had one, their marriage to a demagogic figure of Donald Trump and some other odious characters of conspiratorial thinking of late. Mike, when you opened this talk and gave us, and thank you for the history lesson, kind of as we're walking through this, putting that in perspective, my mind actually went back to a much more recent event, less than 10 years ago, when Paul Ryan became Speaker of the House, and just trying to juxtapose, compare and contrast that time period to what we're looking at now, because there were some similarities and there were also some extreme differences. One of the similarities, of course, was it was a margin, very thin margins, and the Republican Party was in a lot of ways at war with itself. And Paul Ryan looked to be literally the only person that could be elected speaker. No one else was trusted. He was at least somebody that could say, okay, we can all respect this guy, right? He was more a unity candidate, whereas we're seeing the exact opposite with McCarthy. Also, he almost became speaker dragging and kicking his way. They drug him into that office. I think he correctly identified that, I used to be a presidential vice presidential candidate. If I become speaker over this rowdy group, that's probably the end of my political career, I'm assuming is what he was thinking, and he was probably right about that. Whereas Kevin McCarthy has sold his soul to the devil, went down to Mar-a-Lago to do the Trump apology tour just to retain this job. And I think there is a sense at which, even though I don't necessarily agree with the more odious elements of my party that are speaking out against McCarthy, I do think there is a recognition that this guy lacks the character and the strength to just stand in their convictions, and that does not serve him well. And I'm just struck by, in less than a decade's time within my party, how far we have fallen, and how these characters who in a certain degree had existed, but they've just come to the fore in a matter that had never been possible in the past. And that's terrible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Back off.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Just to back up what you've said, Josh, said that the same event that you're speaking of, Kevin McCarthy, as House Majority Leader, was thought to be next in line, but this same kind of coalition that we're seeing band together against him now banded against him back then, and that's why back on election night, when it became clear that this red wave that pundits had spent years predicting was not going to materialize, the first thing I did, Mike, I texted you and I said, there is a very good chance Kevin McCarthy will not become the speaker, because this he is dealing with a caucus that has proven itself to be ungovernable, and he is dealing with a caucus that not even 10 years ago blocked him from becoming speaker in the first place, a caucus that begged for Paul Ryan to be its leader and then ran him out of the town, and before then ran John Boehner out of town. This is a guy who, even after selling himself out to the people who, ran into the Capitol hoping to kill him, did everything, still was not able to get the support of, Lauren Boebert. Marjorie Taylor Greene has thrown her hat in with him, but has, completely burned away her credibility with that crowd anyway. And he's still does not have the votes to become speaker, even after 11 votes now. I think they're preparing for the 12th as we speak. So, it's becoming very clear that Kevin McCarthy has really done all this work for nothing. And really the only question now is, when he drops out of the speakership race, does he go back to being a backbencher or does he resign?
Well, I think to your point, it's an undesirable job. And the Republicans, I feel like generally speaking, have been better at the Democrats at building at the state and local level, finding candidates, building them up, bringing them to the federal level, and then therefore building their coalition at, again, the federal level. So it's interesting that all of that work over all of these years of getting candidates up each ladder still results in this situation, which is where no one besides Kevin McCarthy wants to be speaker. There's no one that's been like, you know what, groom me for this position. I'm interested. Put me as like runner up. And so I think, we're starting to see some of the holes in government. We did, especially during the Trump administration, of where there isn't a backup of something. There isn't that next step. And this is one that not only the Republicans are dealing with now in terms of, okay, who's going to actually take this on? But say the Democrats take the House in 2024 or beyond that, this is going to be a problem they deal with too, because just because it swaps to a different party, the job doesn't get any more desirable. So I think this is highlighting a larger issue in terms of how we actually put people in leadership in the House in general. And I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I'm happy to watch C-SPAN all day. So, clear my schedule, keep me on the books for that. But I think we have to figure out a better process in both parties for getting people into leadership and make it more appealing. The job actually has to become better. And I don't know exactly how we do that, but it needs to start. That recruitment definitely needs to start at the base level, at the state races, and below that as well, as we bring people up the ranks. Because otherwise, we're just going to keep seeing this happen.
And, it's noteworthy that McCarthy was Boehner's House whip when the Tea Party carried the GOP to victory in 2010. And Boehner relied on McCarthy to kind of be that intermediary between him and that section of the party. He relied on him to cajole the new forces into the party fold. McCarthy opened up his office as a hangout spot, and he held listening sessions in an attempt with mixed success to get Boehner and the votes he needed to get some things done on Capitol Hill 10 years ago, and that the early part of the Obama era. And now here we are, and McCarthy now, who used to be the fringe whisperer, is now finding himself the hostage. And it's kind of like, the goal is no longer just to stop McCarthy. It's to kind of just destroy him, to really just put a nail in the coffin of his political career and aspirations, so that they can go home and say, I took it to the establishment, similar to how they, how that part of the party really took it to Eric Cantor in 2014. And so now McCarthy's he's in a difficult situation, because it doesn't matter what he concedes, it's never going to be enough. He's made multiple concessions. Just to, point out some of the concessions he made, a lot of them pertain to rules and regulations in the party. This is a guy who conceded, lowering the threshold to allow a vote of no confidence in the speaker. He imposed limits on the nonpartisan Office of Congressional Ethics, creating a new select committee to investigate the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI, eliminating the creation of House staff labor unions, ending the practice of proxy voting and virtual participation in hearings, and restoring the Holman Rule. And he's making more concessions, and none of it matters. And so now we're seeing a new era where the purpose is to blow up the building. It's not to get anything in return for this, other than the bragging rights that I took down Kevin McCarthy. So with that being said, I'm wondering if the consensus builders, I think Sammy, you mentioned it, the leadership in the House of Representatives for the Republican Party is the most miserable job, it seems, in elected politics in America today. So, does all of this mean that the consensus builders in the party are forever gone, in your view?
Well, Mike, there's that. What's the famous quote from the voter of the leopards eating faces party? Oh, I never thought the leopards would eat my face. I think we're finding ourselves in a very similar situation, or rather, our friends on the Republican Party are finding themselves in a very similar situation where they're dealing with the beasts of their own machinations. This goes back, more than a decade and a half, back to when I first became interested in politics in my junior year when President Barack Obama was first elected, and we saw the early risings of the Tea Party back then, and how this wing of the so-called Freedom Caucus is manifesting itself. It's very clear that they've run any sort of goodwill or moderate, much to his value and his mission. Josh, I just really can't understand how there would be an interest in the Republican Party for consensus building, for the type of conservatism that you're interested in seeing. I mean, I'm happy to welcome it. I do think that much to the doom and gloom that we're speaking of on this podcast currently, I do believe there's at least one consensus builder in government, and that's President Joe Biden, who's passed multiple bipartisan legislation during the most divisive time in modern history, as president, working with members of the same party that can't find its footing within itself. Whether you look at the bipartisan infrastructure deal, or the any number of the bipartisan bills that President Biden's been able to pass, including legislation around climate change. There's at the end of the day, there's a lot of serious challenges in our way, whether that's climate, whether that's the economy. Mike, as you mentioned, I just recently was married, and we had a large guest list, and many of our guests were unable to attend because of different health things that came up, whether that was RSV or COVID positive tests, things like that. There's still an ongoing, viral pandemic that's affecting people's day-to-day lives. That seems to be something that our government needs to take more of a serious look at as we continue into this next year. But I again, for the life of me, I can't see a Republican Party that's interested in solving any of these issues. I can't see a Republican Party that's interested in anything beyond investigating what illicit material may exist in the laptop of the president of the United States' son. And if we're not getting past that point, I don't see how we're going to build toward a better future.
Now, far be it from me to be the hopeful person in a group, but here I go. I actually do think there not only is a capacity and much hope for consensus building, but they never left. There are plenty of consensus builders in the Republican Party. I mean, let's bear in mind, we're talking about 20 people in the GOP. That's less than 10% of the entire group. When the margins are this thin, less than 10% can sway the entire thing. And I'm not blind to the fact that my party has a problem building a consensus. But this has been an issue since, I think we've already discussed this, since kind of the Tea Party era. And in certain degrees kind of prior to that, the Republican Party has had a very strong desire, the rank and file, to blow up the establishment for a long time. And that can take various forms. To to a certain, there are certain leaders that are less destructive than others. Donald Trump, I think, is sort of the archetype. And as we're seeing some of the House members now are those who they don't really have a plan. They're just trying to blow things up, hoping that that will help something somehow. But I do think consensus is possible. It's not maybe possible in the moment. I think Republican or Democrat, it does not matter. The majority of Americans, when asked, do we need to work together as a country? Does government need to work together? Do we need consensus? The vast majority say yes. The irony is, if you ask a follow-up question, which is the polar opposite, which is, should my elected representatives stick through their guns and not compromise? They also say yes. And I think that's kind of the problem we're having here is and I understand we're talking about the Republicans just now. I'm not trying to do a both sidesism, but I do think there is this overwhelming contradictory spirit in the United States that we want consensus, but what we actually mean by that is the other side has to stop believing what they're believing and come over and join us. And that's literally not consensus. So I do think there's hope for it. I just don't see any hope in the short term.
I do agree with that. And I think part of it is people not voting in the primaries. We always see this happen time and time again, obviously at points where it gets worse on both sides of the aisle. But people get to general election day and they're like, this person's too extreme. And then the person ends up in their caucus and things like this happen. And they're like, how did this happen? It's like, you didn't vote in the primary. You didn't actually pick the candidates that build consensus from the get-go. So we're missing step one, and then we're looking now to put a Band-Aid on it. So I think building consensus and having consensus makers is totally possible, but we need to get the electorate out early, and we need to get them involved in primaries so that this isn't a reoccurring issue. Like, this is totally solvable. We're at Band-Aid level right now, not, fix it from the base.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I agree a little bit with Josh also, with a small caveat. I think there is capacity for consensus. But I think right now we're looking at this as, there has to be a capacity for consensus within the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I think we can take a step back and look at the House as a whole. I think that, we just look at it right now. You have 213 votes, for the Democrats. And, you can, of course, the Republicans have the majority right now, but there has to be, and, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, there has to be at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 Republican House members who are Republican members in Biden districts, right? Like, we talk a lot about how Joe Manchin, has to play this unique role in the Senate because he represents a state that is 60-70% Donald Trump. If the Republican Party is showing that they do not have an ability and they are really incompetent right now, they have no ability for consensus, and they are not ready to lead. Maybe the Democrats, if this continues to go further, maybe have to looking at one of these Republicans in a Biden district and say, hey, we can come together, with a deal here. 4 or 5 of you guys come together, we make you the speaker, and all the Democrats will go and vote for you. I think that is a possibility that no one is discussing, and I think the Democrats they will be doing a disservice if they didn't at least explore that possibility to put up a Republican that might be more confident or like easier for their agenda to get pushed forward here. So.
I actually disagree with you on that one, Jerry. As far as it relates to building consensus, remember that since Newt Gingrich became Speaker, the priority for Republican leadership has not been to govern, but just been to oppose whatever Democrats do. That started with Newt Gingrich and his government shutdown, continued with impeaching Bill Clinton over his sexual improprieties. It continued into the Tea Party under Obama. And, now here we are, where instead of these statesman type, representatives, you've got people whose whole thing is to just block and say no. So, who knew that when you build your caucus around people whose whole thing is saying no to everything, that once you come in the majority, you can't get them to vote you for Speaker? But I don't think Democrats are necessarily obligated to help Republicans find a speaker. For the good of the country, Democrats are supposed to help the Republicans as it relates to legislation, as it relates to funding the government and doing the people's business. But this is supposed to be the easy part. This is not necessarily governing. This is just the portion of, okay, we're choosing who's going to be the person who actually runs the House, and this is the person who is supposed to be the leader of the largest faction in the House. And so Democrats are not obligated to do Kevin McCarthy's work for him. They should, continue with supporting their own leadership. Once Republicans get a speaker, then they can start talking about deal making and reaching across the aisle and bipartisanship. But this is not supposed to be a bipartisan function. And as it relates to, the everything else and the lack of statesmen, I do think there are a handful of Republicans who are willing and able to be those consensus builders, but they haven't actually shown that they're willing and able to be so. And it's partially because of the nature of the House, which is supposed to be for the crazies, while the Senate by nature is supposed to be much more collaborative and collegial. So, this is kind of where we get to. I don't necessarily think it's what the framers intended, but,
I also think that it's not really a lack of consensus builders within the party, but more just the party not being willing to accept consensus builders. I'm fully baffled by this whole situation. Like, I just can't wrap my head around it personally. Trying to even theorize why this is happening. Like, I don't get it. Especially given that Sam and I talk a lot about this on our show, is that the Republican Party, one of the best things that they're good at is being united together. And that's, I feel like, what I've noticed over the past few years. So to see this play out right now is just so shocking and so confusing, especially because, like, my question too is like, okay, what if Republicans did do better in this last midterm election? What if they had a bigger majority? What would it look like then? Like, why now, especially thinking about the split between some of these more extremist House members in the GOP too. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene is on McCarthy's side, but Boebert isn't. It's just, all of it is so baffling to me, and it has me thinking about much bigger things of like why this is happening now, and trying to kind of like be some type of pundit about it. I just personally am like, I don't know if anyone knows truly what the hell is going on right now. I can't wrap my head around it.
Manny, point of order, speaking as a Republican,
yeah,
and you may be factually right that my side is better at being united, but my side is convinced your side is better at being united.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah,
I think it's kind of the old, like, every side is convinced they're the ones losing. It's kind of interesting when you're on the other end of it. Your perspective changes somehow.
Well, I think the past few years has at least showed us a little bit more that the GOP has been so good at unity, just especially given the Trumpism that we lived through and how they stuck together through all of that, and through after an insurrection on our government saying, okay, like, I don't think it really happened. It wasn't a big deal. Like, they all came together pretty much on that, with the exception of a few.
Like I said, you may be completely correct.
Yeah.
I'm just saying your average Republican is not convinced that we're the united ones.
Yeah. And that's a testament to Nancy Pelosi, if we're being honest, right? Because this dynamic exists in the Democratic Party also, right? So you have we have two parties, but you look at the political spectrum, you have different wings. You have the progressive wing, you have your more moderate Democrats, and it's the same, type of dynamic on the right. So like both parties, they have this issue where you have this establishment part of the party that is usually in power, but they have to deal with some people who are on their outliers of their party, right, on the outside, the far left or the far right. And Nancy Pelosi, she dealt with that. She made a deal a few years ago to only serve as a speaker for one more term. She dealt with a lot of progressive demands, and she a very loud and quite honestly more powerful wing on that far left than it is really when you want to put it in this type of way on the far right that McCarthy is dealing with. But Pelosi was always able to keep her caucus together, and that shows the strength that she had. I think it's a testament to her legacy. But I agree with Maddie. I think when you kind of look back at 2016, I think most Democrats were saying that when we saw how the Republican Party with most of the establishment was so anti-Trump. But when he became that speaker, that nominee, even Ted Cruz eventually came together, supported Trump through 2016. And people say on the left, one of the reasons we lost was because we weren't able to really come together. But I really think, Josh, I think what you're articulating, I think that's really is a testament to Nancy Pelosi and then her legacy as a whole.
I want to just make the comparison with this Congress, with the 1946 incoming Republican majority, the 80th Congress, the first time the Republicans had the majority in 15 years. And Harry Truman uses that as his straw man for the 48 campaign. Harry Truman was written off, long before the general election of 1948 came into being. But what the Congress did was give him something to run against, and he called it the Do Nothing Congress. I think that what we're seeing is only indicative of more to come in this Congress. I mean, if you can't agree on who's going to just be the speaker, I mean, who's going to be the prevailing voices when it comes down to these investigations you want to launch so badly, right? To Maddie's point, Marjorie Taylor Greene hitched her wagon with McCarthy, thinking if he's the winning side, I get legitimacy here. And Kevin McCarthy, I mean, he's not innocent in this to me. I mean, he gave legitimacy to that wing of the party for so long in hopes that he would be welcomed and, bolstered into leadership without any kind of, pushback. And he's really getting the opposite of what he anticipated. He was on cable news saying, Marjorie Taylor Greene will have committee assignments. Now, this is after she had said anti-Semitic things and was, criticized across the board from both sides about that and everything like that. But here he is saying, look, I'm going to give legitimacy to that voice in the party. And it kind of reminds me of my mom, who was a teacher. Every time she would leave the room, she would put the worst kid in charge who would give her the most stress. And a lot of times people would say, well, why did you put him in charge? And the rationale she had was that if I put the worst behaved kid in charge, then all of a sudden he has a stake in making sure that that the classroom is, well behaved, quiet, and everything like that. And he would get frustrated when his own fellow classmates would, act up on his watch. And I think that's very apt in terms of comparing that with Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy was someone who really was hobnobbing with that wing of the party for years. And now he's being betrayed by it in a public, in such a public way. The thing that he's been gearing up for. He started off with Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor. He's the last of that three. I think the Young Guns is what they call themselves. He's the last of that group. And here he is on the cusp, or seemingly was supposed to be on the cusp of the speakership. And time again, every time they have these votes, his chances get lower and lower. And so, just to circle back to what I said earlier about what was discussed earlier about whether Democrats should, pull away some at least 4 or 5 Republicans in Biden-leaning districts. Do you think that House Democrats should help Republicans get McCarthy in the speakership in exchange for some concessions of their own?
I was kind of thinking that today, that might be a good strategy, just because, again, I don't know what the pathway is for the Republicans. But yeah, as Democrats, as you sit there and you're like, okay, we haven't even been sworn in yet. We also have this party who has members in it who did not deny this insurrection on our government. Now we have our House with no rules and no metal detectors. And just there's a lot of things that I find very concerning about this moment that we're in right now. And I think there should be a little bit of urgency from the Democrats to try and find a solution as well. And I thought, yeah, maybe they can help McCarthy and then in turn have some, sway over some legislative priorities moving forward. I think that would be possibly a good strategy. Do I trust that McCarthy would follow through on that? Not really, but I don't know. It's crazy. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do think that there are so many concerns. I mean, first of all, DC can't do anything right now because it relies on the House. We have all these members that aren't sworn in. We have national security concerns. Like, we need to move this forward. So there's got to be something. And I do think that strategically and from a communication standpoint, this could help the Democrats by making them look like the consensus builders. They're going to put, themselves in the fire a little bit here and make something happen. See, they do work with Republicans. It's not just a totally partisan situation. So I do think there is a benefit for them doing it. But like Maddie said, I mean, trusting McCarthy with anything.
Yeah, they've already embarrassed themselves to this extent. This is so, again, I don't know how many times I have to say mind-blowing, but just this is so unprecedented in such a historic moment that, they have, again, embarrassed themselves already to this extent that now Democrats can step in and like save the day. It would seem, like Sam said, like such a powerful and impactful communications moment and PR moment for them that honestly they need, especially moving into this upcoming election in 2024. So.
And I agree with Maddie, but this doesn't have to be McCarthy, right? This idea that we have to put forth the leader of the Republican Party in this position because the Republicans have 5 more House members than Democrats. The Democrats can negotiate. They can negotiate, different concessions with someone more of liking of their agenda, and negotiate certain committee assignments. And I think there is an appetite for that to happen, and then you kind of present this as not just like more of a unity ticket, but more of like, look, this is we want to promote stability across the world to our adversaries, especially during this time when there's an attack on democracy, and just even the questioning of the strength of democracy across the world. And it doesn't have to be the leader of the Republican Party. Like, it doesn't even have to be a member of Congress. Honestly, the Constitution doesn't say it has to be a sitting member. But the last thing I want to say about this, I think people right now are looking at who else other than McCarthy, right? Who else? And if you really think about it, if January 6th didn't happen, the person everybody be looking at right now would probably be Liz Cheney, right? Like, this would be her moment to step up and probably be the next speaker. But I do think there is an appetite for this type of unity situation. I think Democrats, they should negotiate. I don't know how far it will go, but I think that you should at least explore it, because if not, you're just going to sit here and wait for them to finish fighting. And then at the end of the day, your option is going to be McCarthy or somebody worse. Right. So you might as well take advantage of this opportunity.
Mike, I spent a good deal of time in South Carolina. I went to the University of South Carolina for college, spent a good deal of time down there. There's actually a saying the folks say down in South Carolina, maybe not in such polite circles as one of these, but I think it might be useful for folks on this panel to hear in light of the question you asked, which is, if you see your opponent drowning, you don't throw him a life raft, you throw him an anchor. And I think that this might be a moment where the Democratic Party has already pretty much suggested, who exactly they believe should be in the leadership for the speaker, and that's Hakeem Jeffries. I think that's exactly who they should promote. If the Republicans want to deal with the Democrats, want to find a consensus speaker from their own party, they have, ample time to do that. They've already, wasted 12 rounds of voting and almost a week. If they want to continue that direction, they ought to. But if they want to have some assistance from the Democrats, perhaps some Republicans, should not show up to the chambers and allow Hakeem Jeffries to take the gavel, as the Democrats have already suggested. To echo my point from the beginning of the broadcast, the Republicans aren't showing any true interest in governing, and I think that they maybe, the sensible members of their caucus probably should allow the gavel to go to the side of Congress that's willing to actually govern.
Can we
I've
talk
said
about
it already, but literally putting McCarthy in the speakership is a bad idea for Democrats, and any Democrat who's seriously considering it has spent too much time watching The West Wing and not enough time living in reality. The problem with a McCarthy speakership isn't just the fact that McCarthy is speaker, it's everything that McCarthy has promised to the rest of his caucus. Investigations into Hunter Biden, Jim Jordan as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, gutting the Office of Congressional Ethics. If Democrats back McCarthy as speaker, he'll constantly not only be under attack by his own party, but Democrats will be the ones expected to prop up him as he attempts to keep up and follow up on all these promises he's made to the rest of his conference. And that's just not a good thing for them, and it's not a good thing for the country at large. Like Ethan said, if we expect Democrats to be the adults in the room, as most voters do, given the fact that every time something like this happens, the instant thing is, why aren't Democrats reaching out to help the Republicans? Give Democrats a chance to be the adult in the room and ask Republicans why they're not reaching out to the person, why they're not reaching across the aisle to support the person who has consistently garnered the most votes through this process. It was a very powerful moment today during the 7th or 8th ballot, and I think we're on the 12th now, when Catherine Clark stood up to nominate Hakeem Jeffries and simply repeated 212 7 times to point out that he's the one person throughout this whole process who has been able to garner the support of his party. So he's the one who we should be talking about reaching across the aisle to put into the speakership. And I have my own problems with Jeffries, but when you've got one person who's able to control their party and one person who's not, it's kind of a no-brainer as to who should be.
Yeah, I'm like the biggest Hakeem Jeffries fan, but I mean, he's not going to be like the speaker like right now. Like it's just not going to happen. But like, like even this idea, like, and you can say it's naive or whatever, but the idea that, what we just said, a couple of people have said, well, the Republican Party is our enemy, or, like the Democratic Party is the enemy of the other side. And it's just like all this, like, this is why people don't like politics. Right. Like, so it's not what is good for the Republican Party or good for the Democratic Party. It's like what is good for America. But then you take a step back. If you look at all these representatives, most of them are working in their own political interests. Right. They're going to do what's in their political interest. And if that interest aligns with them bucking their own party, we have seen that time and time again, that these political actors would do that. And I'm saying that there has to be a route where you can identify some members of Congress who it is in their political interest of survival to be a consensus builder, right? If that is saying, look, I am a congressman in Seattle, right, which voted for Joe Biden, but I know I have a tough election coming up. If I am put on this national platform as the Republican speaker, at the same time, I'm going to, have these concessions through the Democratic Party where I'm going to, put some of the Democrats into these chairman positions. Like that is something that I think would be attractive to some people. But like the idea that we have to help McCarthy, like that is ridiculous. I don't think that we should be putting forth McCarthy. But the idea that we should just turn a blind eye and just say, look, that is their issue. That is the enemy. We shouldn't even consider, building a consensus. I think that is what not just Americans don't like about politics, but I think our adversaries are just clapping at this, applauding this, right? Because it's just showing that we're unstable as a government, and we can't be, believed around the world when, we come and want to be a voice for these major issues, especially the voice of democracy, when our democracy is such in flux.
This is the thing, Jerry and Nate, the Democrats are not going to be happy with whoever the Republicans put forward, whether that's Steve Scalise or Donalds or whoever. Whoever is the flavor of the day, right? I think, however, the Democrats can be pragmatic and think to themselves, okay, we are in a slight minority, but how do we maximize our leverage here? And I think in maximizing their leverage, they have to entertain the thought of coming to the rescue to end this madness. People are, making predictions that this is going to last until February. And we need to have a House of Representatives, right? As of right now, there is no House of Representatives. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, the Democrats can either continue to just stay to their side and laugh at the conflict, the chaos on the other side, or maybe we can jump in and make some demands of our own, right? The Republicans had a laundry list of subjects that they wanted to investigate. How do we play a role in curbing that or doing something to kind of mitigate the authority that they thought they had going forward into the 118th Congress? Those are some of the things that I'm seeing, as possibilities, especially after McCarthy has shown there is no link to which he's not willing to go to get this job. And it seems like he's the only one on that side that wants this job. Jim Jordan repeatedly said, I don't want this job, even though they kept nominating him. Donalds knows good and well that he can't get any more than 20 votes. and this is more of a statement than anything. Scalise, I can bet you, doesn't want the job, even though his office is preparing for the next steps. And so I'm just thinking, okay, how do we play, as if we're here to, maximize our leverage here? And I think making a demand and probably would be in the interest of Democrats to a degree. Also, I just want to just point out the fact that I think it would have been easier. I mean, I think it would have been more difficult for Biden to run for re-election if the House was Democrat, right? Because then they can always point to 4 years of Democratic control in the House of Representatives and link that to Biden. They can link, they would be. It's easier to complain about what you're seeing as going wrong, right? We saw it in this last election, Afghanistan, crime, and the southern border. Well, now they're in charge, and not much is getting done on the first week, right? And so Biden, like Harry Truman, I think is going to be, counted off. But at the end of the day, people are going to look, okay, who is producing results here? Let's look at the results here. And this is all happening at the backdrop of Biden and McConnell, locking arms with one another in Kentucky, with Mike DeWine and Andy Bashir and Portman and Sherrod Brown. I mean, the story writes itself.
But I think Mike, to your point and to Jerry's point, I mean, I guess I'd be more open to this idea of Democrats reaching across the aisle if I knew of 10 Republicans that would do the same thing for Hakeem Jeffries. Like, and I can't think of 2 Republicans in the House that would do the same thing for Hakeem Jeffries. I just don't see what, to the question of political interest, I just don't see what interest it serves the Democratic Party to help the Republicans in this way. Knowing full well that they would never do the same thing to seat Hakeem Jeffries. There's that. And then, and then I think about what had leader, sorry, not speaker, McCarthy, had leader McCarthy been seated on the first ballot, what business of government would the Republican majority in the House be looking to accomplish? They've stated their goals. They want to investigate the president's family. They want to, have another fight over the debt ceiling. It's looking like we'll probably face another government shutdown. They're very, at least from social media aspect, I'm not sure, what they're saying in their own cloakrooms, but at least from social media, it seems that, they plan to harass public school teachers about their sexual identities. They want to, do the same to collegiate athletes. I'm just unsure of like where the serious like policy outcomes that this party is moving for. I'm just curious as to where they're coming from. I guess in short, what are we rushing to create, a government leadership to accomplish? It doesn't seem like this party is interested in governing, and why not have the folks who are actually interested in governing govern?
I think those 2 representatives were kicked out. Liz Cheney. So in the last remaining minutes of the show, I do want to, just pivot a little bit. Biden announced a new program to curb illegal immigration as he prepares to visit the southern border. Under pressure to address, the influx, the president also warns potential migrants do not just show up at the border. And in a rare White House address on the nation's southern border crisis, the president today unveiled a new policy that will accept 30,000 migrants a month from 4 nations, but it's also going to crack down on those who fail to use the plan's legal pathways. Speaking in the Roosevelt Room in the White House, the president said that the policy is going to grant humanitarian parole to eligible migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. It will also work as part of a border strategy that incorporates an expanded use of Title 42's expulsions. The announcement was made at the Department of Homeland Security and Justice, and they revealed details of a plan to impose new regulations, a version of a Trump-era policy often called the transit ban. And under this new rule, migrants would be prohibited from applying for asylum in the United States unless they were first turned away for safe harbor by another country. It would also deem ineligible migrants who don't go through authorized ports of entry. And DHS and DOJ will hear public comment on the proposed regulation before it goes into effect. What are your thoughts about this? Now, this has been the one albatross, it seems, on President Biden's neck since January the 20th of 2021. Whether you're listening to hardcore right-wing news, or whether you're listening to mainstream Fox News, right? Everyone on that side of the aisle agrees that this is the one target on Biden's back that it seems to be effective, right? A lot of polling indicates that Democrats don't do well as it pertains to the issue of the southern border. Now, this is going to be a year where a lot of presidential announcements are made. It's also a year where there are some off-year elections. For instance, in Kentucky, Andy Beshear is going to be running for re-election. And so this is something that's, has been used to be nationalized, in recent years especially. Has the president's new policy proven to be an effective way to kind of strike a middle chord where the White House doesn't look like they're just looking to grant amnesty completely, but also making sure that they're giving like a, legit, safe, and, straightforward pathway to citizenship for those who want to play by the rules?
Mike, I have not looked into the specifics enough to have like a firm opinion one way or another. So I'll just offer a very general couple of comments. I hold Jonah Goldberg, the podcaster's position on immigration, which is whenever he's asked, what immigration plan do you prefer? His response is to have one. And that doesn't mean that we can't carve out bad plans, but I think that that's what's missing. It's been missing George W. Bush, Barack Obama. I mean, Donald Trump, in a weird way, almost fixed the immigration debate, not by doing anything about it other than just horrible rhetoric. It at least calmed down the more odious elements of the anti-immigration brigade. That being said, like this is not just Biden's problem, though. This is kind of started to talk about this conversation. This is the issue that brought down establishment Republicans, that led to Trump's rise in the first place. And I think this is one of the dangers, regardless. And I suspect if on this panel here, if we were to lay out exactly what we want the immigration policy to be like, there's probably going to be a lot of disagreement between us. That being said, when you have a problem of this magnitude that goes unsolved and unresolved, you end up with Donald Trump. That's how you get, when you don't get serious adults dealing with serious questions, you get the unserious adults showing up to try to deal with it. So I would just say that I do agree with you. This is one of the weak points in Biden's presidency, and it is going to do not only him great harm, but continue to do the nation great harm to the degree that we can't get this under control.
Yeah, and it doesn't just do harm to these politicians. I mean, this is harm to like real people, right? Like some of the things that we've seen from Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis, playing politics with the lives of some of these, families who are trying to come over to the United States for a better life. It is honestly, it's disgusting of what's been happening, right? They've been busing, migrants up to New York or to DC to Kamala Harris's house. But as disgusting as it is to play politics with people's lives, I think what the governor of Texas is doing, honestly, and what the Florida governor has done to this extent is kind of show or highlight what the problem is. Because what actually is happening is Greg Abbott sends buses of people to New York, and after a month, the New York mayor and New York governor is saying, "Well, this is too much. We're being overwhelmed. We can't handle, this issue." At the same time, Texas has been overwhelmed and been screaming and saying that we need some help for years, and it's the same thing dealing with all the states that's on the southern border. So I think both parties is in their political interest to come together and to find a way to fix this issue that has been really an issue that has been at the forefront for many decades. But hopefully, Mike, this is a step in the right direction. But as the 2024 election is coming up, I just pray that these governors who are trying to position themselves to run for president stop playing with real people's lives, to score political points.
I don't like this plan at all, Mike. And the reason why is because it doesn't do much about, it doesn't actually change much. You can't enter the country illegally when you're seeking asylum. And that's the process most of these people who are coming into this country are claiming. Part of being able to request asylum in the United States is that you have to physically be in the United States. Or at least that's what it was until the pandemic, and Trump invoked Title 42, which was an emergency provision that he used through the pandemic to keep refugees and asylum seekers in Mexico. Once Biden decided the pandemic was over and tried to lift Title 42, Republicans made a big stink about how the pandemic was over, but not the pandemic created emergency response. And eventually the courts forced them to put Title 42 back in place, but this doesn't actually solve the problem. It only erodes the ability of asylum seekers to actually seek asylum in the United States, and instead forces them to remain in their home countries. When we talk about political instability in Haiti and Nicaragua, this is large, and Cuba and Venezuela as well. This is largely caused by U.S. action. So not only do we have to suffer from the ramifications of U.S. policy in Latin America in the past 120 years, they also have to suffer the ramifications of those policies as they try to create a better life for themselves. And it's always this cruelty, at least to me, to immigrants from the global South or from the Middle East. But when the war in Ukraine escalated to the levels that we saw in February, this country and much of the world opened their arms to Ukrainian refugees because they looked a certain way. And so I don't think this is actually a very good policy at all. It's just cloaked in gentle language.
So is this immigration issue going to be the thing that revives Trump's standing in the electorate, at least in the electorate of the Republican Party? Now, I ask that in light of the fact that his endorsement of Kevin McCarthy seems to be as worthless as I don't know.
As any of his other endorsements.
The thing that Lauren Boebert, it's so crazy how Lauren Boebert is able to now, who got her whole rise about. It's like it reminds me of Age of Ultron, the Avengers movie, where Tony Stark and Bruce Banner decide they're going to create a robot, and he ends up taking on a mind of its own, and then next he's the villain of the entire movie. Lauren Boebert is now standing up and saying, wait a minute, Trump, you need to put your endorsement somewhere else. She's telling him where to put his endorsement. And the endorsement doesn't seem to be holding this nearly as much weight as it may have 7 years ago, right? Or even in the beginning of his presidency. So I'm wondering if immigration is going to be the thing that kind of revives him. Oftentimes I forget he's even running for president still.
I think Trump would have a harder time with that same playbook for the simple reason that we do have, as Jerry mentioned, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott. There are other Republican prominent leaders that have successfully kind of carried that same message of put me in charge and I will crack down hard on immigration. The conventional wisdom is Trump might win if we see another 2016 in which he's up there on stage with 19 other people, because we do know that he's got at least a small army of very devoted supporters. I also dare say it's entirely possible that Trump wins if the left overplays its hand in trying to prosecute. In a weird way, I think the most helpful thing that happened to Trump after January 6th was the raid on Mar-a-Lago, because it made him look like the victim. I'm not necessarily saying he is. I'm just saying that I think that mindset where we get back into this role of it's us versus them, it really makes Trump look like the champion, and it makes it harder for other Republicans to gain traction.
Yeah, as the newly minted husband of a Haitian American, I will say I'm not a very big fan of President Biden's immigration quote unquote plan. But I do think that to this administration's credit, we should also mention that in the past year, in 2022, more American citizens have been naturalized than in any year previous, which I do think is something that we should be touting, is that this when this immigration system does work, it is working, and it's allowing many people to achieve their American dream. That being said, though, I do agree with many of the other panelists that the best immigration plan would be an actual plan forward, and one that allows people to live with dignity and move with dignity throughout this country and throughout the world. I just think that if, again, kind of wrapping both conversations together, if we can get a government that is interested in consensus building, is interested in doing the business of government, I think we can see some of these actual real challenges be faced head on. I'm, despite some of my previous comments, I'm very hopeful about this country. I'm very hopeful about the future of our government. And I do believe that, this project of democracy in America is not at its twilight phases. I just want to see us move forward, and it seems like the swamp is, for lack of a better term, is really grinding things to a halt at the moment.
You're advocating we drain the swamp?
Well, if there are no, oh, go ahead, Sammy.
I was just going to say one last thing in terms of immigration. I haven't looked fully at the plan, so I similarly can't form a full opinion. But what I can say that the Democrats should be doing as we go towards 2024 is painting the humanitarian picture and painting the real picture of immigration and defining terms. What does asylum actually mean? What does it mean to be a refugee? Because people genuinely don't know the difference between these terms. And that's where these conversations get so out of hand. People don't understand this topic, and it is convoluted. The laws around it are convoluted. The conversation is really hard to synthesize and bring to, your kitchen table and talk with your family about it, for sure. But I think we need to improve the communication around immigration in general, and then from there we'll be able to figure out a better plan and also communicate a better plan. Because right now it's hard. Even if this plan were like literally the best thing you've ever seen in your life, I can guarantee you that the Dems would drop the ball in communicating it. And it would be panned no matter what. So I think we need to start at the basics, and this is with everything. We need to define the terms, define the relationship, define the terms, whatever, and move from there. And then we'll actually figure out a way to move forward. So that's what I'm hopeful, but that's what I think needs to happen.
I think that's a good place to end, really on a positive high note. Thank you all so much. Josh Lewis, Saving the Elephants podcast. Where can we find the Saving Elephants podcast for those who want to tune in, support, and follow?
No, thanks for asking. Well, if any podcast platform, you can probably just find me on Saving Elephants. If you Google me, I'm competing with all those people trying to save actual elephants. So you might try savingelephants.blog.com is the website.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Ethan Tillman, thanks again. Jerry, Nate, Maddie, and Sammy, thank you so much for being a part of the show. And you can find the Girl and the Gov podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast, Stitcher, and any and all podcast apps. So follow, support, share. And you've got some really heavy hitter guests coming on your show too. So check it out. I hope this is not the last time I see Josh, Maddie, and Sammy. I've thoroughly enjoyed them tonight. Ethan, Jerry, Nate, thanks for being a part of it. With that being said, I just want to go ahead and conclude by, the same encouragement I give my listeners every week. Challenge the sources of news that you plug into and refrain from sketchy sources of information. Compare and contrast your source of news with other reputable sources and come up with your own opinion that is grounded in fact and based in knowledge. With that being said, thank you so much for tuning into episode 91 of the Political Mike podcast. Have a good night.